I'm about to say some words that I never thought I would say. Literally didn't picture these words coming out of my mouth. Thank you, Donald J. Trump. I'm not even being sarcastic here. You got us talking about things that we need to talk about. Difficult, complicated things like racism and economic justice and sexism. Whoa, sexism lately. Whew. Donnie, you clearly don't get it. First, you brag about grabbing a woman without her consent. Then when people get mad at you, you try to get out of it by claiming you were only bragging about grabbing a woman without her consent. You said you moved on some woman very heavily. That is not an appealing picture in any way. Then you say, I moved on her like a bitch. I'm not even sure what you mean by that. Like most of what you say, it's about half you and half, huh? Following that, you and some dude named Billy Bush, I don't know who this is, you talk about some woman in purple, and you don't sound like two guys who are talking about some pretty woman and saying she's hot. You sound like a hog who just found a hot dog on the ground. You're practically grunting. Then you go on and talk about other women, like some woman in gold, and you say you have to pop a breath mint in case you start kissing her. There is a big difference between in case she wants a kiss and in case you start kissing her. The first, if you're married to someone else and she's not your wife, which is the case here, is just tacky. The second is a crime. And then your famous line that you grab 'em by the pussy. Smooth technique there, Donnie. Wow. That is sexual assault. That is a criminal act. Here's where we need to stop fluttering around about the language you use. The language you use is bad. It reflects the way you think, which is disgusting. We need to look at this as a confession to a crime by a serial perpetrator who is proud of it. We need to talk about all this stuff. We need to talk about how many people, women and girls, and yes, men and boys, get subjected to sexual assault. We need to talk about the fact that sexual assault isn't really about sex. It's about power and violence. It's about taking away another person's right to choice over their own bodies. It's about dehumanizing them and saying they aren't really real and they don't matter and they don't get a choice. And it's at the core of who you are, Donnie. You've said some awful things, but now you have laid it out there so we can't ignore it. You've told us exactly who you are, and if we vote for you, we're saying that's who we are. So, thank you. We're talking about sexual assault, and we need to. We're looking at what you've told us about yourself, and we have to. We're figuring out that we can't afford to vote for a third-party candidate this round, because that might be the move that lands you in the White House. And while we're at it, let's spare a thought for this Billy Bush person who was talking with you about all this and laughing, and what that tells us about him. Because if you are the disease, Donnie, he's a symptom of how big the epidemic is. And let's give a shout out to Mr. Pence. Mr. Pence, it's time to drop out of the race. It's time to abandon this flaming turd you've hooked yourself to. Admit that your pride and your greed and your ambition got you in trouble. And go home. Look for your personal dignity and your integrity. Maybe you'll find them between the sofa cushions. Everyone can get swept away. You got swept away. Now it's time to go home. Put your life back together. Figure out what you do from here. And remind yourself that there are far worse things than losing a contest. Which we've all been reminded of lately. So thank you, Donald J. Trump.